if it has the most information and deepest well of content on Western culture, then its answers are going to kind of be biased in that direction. And then, with all AI, right? So you have the query that you make, that's your question, but that's often appended to like a system prompt. So not only does the model get your question, it gets this whole frame of an additional set of instructions of how to answer your question that you don't really see, which is kind of strange, obviously. To me, would be a critical flaw that if we kind of let it just kind of run and let AI build and build and build, that it would be, we'd be building a giant flawed piece of technology that's already being used in education and healthcare and law enforcement and everywhere else. So it would be pervasive. And, that's a huge, huge issue for it to be biased as well as pervasive.
I think a lot of us are seeing that and are afraid of it. But from there to really say, okay, I'm going to do something about this, I'm going to build something about this. How did that happen?
We've created what's called a RAG model, which means that we have our own data that sits alongside of a foundation model. And by using that external database in a RAG kind of format, when you ask the platform a question, it goes to this database to see if it has additional information that can inform a response. So it's able to answer those questions maybe more accurately or more empathetically, understands the culture more than our foundation partners.
How do you see in that case also the idea of a decentralized AI system?
I think we'll probably see more of that in a way. So we just launched a model yesterday with Intel, and it downloads a version of a model, of a small language model, to your computer. Actually, once you have a model, why do you need to pay me $20 a month? If you have a model and it can do what you want, it's getting to know you better, but it's all on your computer and nobody else has access to it. That's maybe a disruption in the current way that AI companies operate, empowering individual, freedoms and privacy.
Hi, and welcome back to New World in the Making. In this episode, I sit down with John Pasmore, founder and CEO of Latimer AI. Latimer works to bring underrepresented cultures and overlooked data into AI systems so that our technologies don't just reflect a narrow, white, and Western perspective, but opens up to new worldviews, especially when we are talking about how AIs are reshaping our realities, really. We talk about bias, representation, and the deeper responsibility we have of building technologies that reflect the full richness of humanity. So, let's dive in. Just a quick one, and I promise quick one, before we dive into the episode. I really want to take a moment to just say thank you for being here. And to keep this work alive and help it reach even more people, I need your help. Just by hitting that subscribe button, you're becoming an active part of this new world in the making. And you're enabling this conversation to grow into directions we can't even imagine yet. So thank you truly. And now, for real, let's dive into today's conversation. John, thanks so much for being here today.
Oh, I appreciate the invitation.
I'm very excited to talk about AI with you today. But before that, maybe can we go a little bit back into your personal story? How did you get to the place that you're in today?
Well, let's say, to make a long story short, I don't want to go back to the beginning of time. I've been an entrepreneur for quite a while, and let's say I did my first venture-backed business in 2008. We raised $10 million for a business called Voyage TV, and ended up selling that in 2013. But during that period, I was considered a non-technical founder. So I went back to Columbia University here in New York City to work on a computer science degree, going kind of part-time, which took a lot of years, actually. But I got that done. And that's really, kind of set the stage for what I'm doing now with Latimer AI, because I don't think you need a technical background to work in AI, but in some cases it's helpful.
Okay, interesting. So, what did you learn from that startup building, and that you're now having in the new one, Latimer?
What did I learn? I mean, you learn so much. It it took myself and a co-founder a year to raise our money, and so that was kind of the first thing. Is that we went through probably, I don't know, 70 meetings, like in-person pitches before we kind of put together a group of folks that were interested and were able to kind of really move forward. Um, so, there's so many lessons. The other lesson was that, we spent a lot of money building out it was kind of like a Expedia with a video. So you could transact and buy travel, but you could look at video. So in 2008, that was pretty revolutionary. But the site cost us a lot of money. And neither myself or my co-founder at the time were truly technical, and you're just kind of you just have to depend on whatever your tech resources are to kind of lead you in the right direction. And you really don't have a lot of means to push back or choose different directions if if you have no clue what really could work best.
Yeah, I mean, also, I guess 2008 to raise money, I could imagine it was a bit tough, no?
Yeah, yeah, not many people realize that. But yeah, that was there was a stock market crash in 2008.
Yeah.
But our funders, we held our breath during that, but our funders kind of came through on their commitment letters, and we moved forward and built a business.
Wow, congratulations, and also on this being so persistent, like 70 meetings. It's a lot. It's you got to believe in it. It's wow.
Yeah,
Congrats.
yeah, I had a really good co-founder, Michael McNabb. He actually lived in Taiwan and traveled back and forth from Taiwan to New York. Very impressive. I don't think we were even late for any of those meetings across a year. So it was very impressive for him. It was easy for me as these meetings were in the United States, but he was often flying in from somewhere.
Wow. And from there, what led you to then start an AI company like Latimer?
Yeah, I was working with TRS Capital for the most part before Latimer, which is a family office. So a variety of different types of companies. I had completed my degree at Columbia, and just basically, I thought it was super exciting what ChatGPT was able to do. It definitely accelerated what we thought AI could do. There's a whole conversation: is it really AI? Or is it really, generative AI is not necessarily what, some purists would consider, your classic artificial intelligence. But it certainly, had a lot of capabilities out of when they released it. And the next thing we noticed is that there was a ton of bias and inaccuracies. And, I have a teenager at home, and the thought that, young people would be left with AI that could, maybe overlook or not value their culture, to me would be a critical flaw, that if we kind of let it just kind of run and let AI build and build and build, that it would be, we'd be building a giant flawed um, piece of technology that's already being used in education and healthcare and law enforcement and everywhere else. So it would be pervasive. And, that's a huge, huge issue for it to be biased as well as pervasive.
Definitely. I think a lot of us are seeing that and are afraid of it. But from there to really say, okay, I'm going to do something about this. I'm going to build something about this. How did that happen?
I happen to, be around some smart people. Malor Narayan, who was our first CTO and still kind of an acting CTO, but Elton Sampaio, actually in Portugal, leads most of our day-to-day efforts. But in speaking with Malor in particular, we basically just came up with it's not simple, but it's a way that we could launch a product that address bias
Hmm.
without necessarily creating a new foundation model.
Right.
We've created what's called a RAG model, which means that we have our own data that sits alongside of a foundation model. Or, at this point within Latimer, there's now 10 different models to choose from as a consumer or a subscriber. Um, and by using that external database in a RAG kind of format, um, when you ask the platform a question, it goes to this database to see if it has additional information that can inform a response. And if what we've uploaded, which is like the second oldest Black newspaper from 1925 to present, and dissertations and textbooks, it has a better view. Initially we've been focused on Black and Brown people and culture and history here in the United States, so it's able to answer those questions maybe
Mm.
more accurately or more empathetically, understands the culture more than our foundation partners that we use, whether that's OpenAI, Google, Meta, what have you. So it's kind of the first step in building something that's a lot less biased and more accurate. And then it's kind of a journey. So we're just beginning on our journey to build bigger and better products that solve for that issue.
So fascinating. And how did you get to that data?
Um, one of the first people that I consulted with is a university professor here in the United States, Professor Molefe Asante. He created the first African American Studies PhD program at Temple University in Pennsylvania. And he also agreed that as a professor, that having accurate representation of a culture is super important. And he made available some of the textbooks. He's written over 100 books, so he made available several of his textbooks and a giant 500-page manuscript that he was working on, and then pointed us in the direction of, hey, I think that these texts would be informative. These types of dissertations by these writers would be informative. And then, separately, we just, in 2023, we were able to um, really come to an agreement with the New York Amsterdam News, which I think probably would be more difficult now. Um, but we were able to get their library from 1925 to present, still exclusively, but not
Wow.
necessarily tied to it being exclusive. We want everybody ultimately to have accurate AI.
Yeah.
um, so, and it's an ongoing process of identifying documents that we think are maybe not well represented in other models. There are public domain documents, Black abolitionist papers that are, old, so there's no copyright on them. But you want, as a model, you want to have the actual documents as much as possible, as opposed to just, let's say, the Wikipedia recap of those
Right.
documents. And even with Wikipedia, those entries on Wikipedia are often written by not Black people. It's mostly
Mm.
written by white people. So even if it's about a Black person or a Black event, or something about the indigenous cultures here in the United States, it's often not written by those people. It's written by somebody else who might be an expert, or obviously a group of
Yeah.
people can edit Wikipedia. But that the community that Wikipedia has built, for whatever reason, is not as inclusive as one might think it might be, especially around these topics. So it's almost like, oh, this is indigenous culture or indigenous history as told by non-indigenous people, and that's not always the best rendition, I don't think.
No.
It's okay. We've all used Wikipedia at some point, and it's okay, but that should not be the sole, source of
Right.
fact.
Of course. Of course. And how does it work technically? How do you see it also evolve? Um, because I can imagine it's a lot of data to collect, and then from there, and you were saying your main focus first was Black and Brown communities in the United States. How do you see it evolve towards different other communities as well that are underrepresented? Would you see kind of different models trained on different data, or how is that technically possible?
I think we can do it with one big
Big one.
model that's, just you can kind of control the temperature or the kind of, like a model is almost like a person, right? So you have some models that might have a more kind of just general empathetic view of diverse cultures versus a focus where it kind of subtly thinks Western culture
Hmm.
is either the best or, what it has the most information on. So if it has the most information and deepest well of content on Western culture, then its answers are going to kind of be biased in that direction.
Of course.
Um, and then, with all AI, right? So you have the query that you make, that's your question,
Yeah.
but that's often appended to like a system prompt. So not only does the model get your question, it gets this whole frame of an additional set of instructions of how to answer your question that you don't really see, which is kind of strange, obviously,
Yeah.
I think at
Yeah.
some point, maybe we as model makers should make the system prompts more visible, because that's a whole evolving landscape in of itself. It used to be that you would just have one system prompt, answer this, somebody would ask a question and you'd be like, answer this question as if you're a university professor talking to a student and use, this format, use bullet points where necessary. And, it would just give you kind of a nicely formatted return on your
Yeah.
response.
Yeah.
But as models advance, now now I can look at your query and look at, for particular keywords in your query or what you're really asking, and then kind of change the system prompt on the fly so that it says different things to different people. So it's setting up the perspective, let's say, of the model based on your system, based on your query. So, you could say, speak to me like I'm a 5-year-old. You could say that in your query and it'll
Yeah.
try and give you very, very detailed step-by-step responses. Or you could say, hey, I'm an expert in this, so please just give me a super high level view of, quantum technology.
Interesting. So, are you using that as well when you are trying to understand how much of a bias it still has, or how do you, yeah, how do you calibrate? How do you check with your model?
We're using a couple of different pieces of software. Also, we're still pretty young, we're still pretty lean. So there's things that we would like to do that we can't do enough, because we have a team that's doing, a tech team that's trying to do many things all at the same time. And they kind of get tired of hearing from me because they're like, John, we're already,
Already over
doing
the
as much
top.
as we can. So, but it is one of the things, and we've kind of benchmarked our model against ChatGPT usually. We wrote a white paper on that using kind of an algorithm that looks at the responses and scores them. So you ask the same question to several models, and then it's almost like a sentiment analysis. You do an analysis on the response to
Okay.
see if one is more, empathetic is maybe too simple a word when you're talking about a big long mathematical formula that looks at language and tries to quantify that language in terms of its bias. But that's essentially what we're doing. Um, Finding bias is a tricky and ongoing science in of itself, because if you're having a conversation really about, let's say, women, um, you want the model to be biased in that conversation to be talking about women. So if you just grabbed one sentence, you could say, well, this is certainly biased, it's only talking about women. But so it has to also try and understand the context of the conversation, that, yeah, well, this is a conversation about women, so it should be about women, or this is a conversation about Indigenous people. So yes, it might be excluding other people, but it's supposed to. So it has
Hmm.
to do
Understand
a bunch
when.
of things. Yeah.
Hmm. No, that's a very good point. I see that. Um, Maybe let's also talk about a bit about the right now the scene of AI that we are having right now without any inclusion of underrepresented voices. What are the biggest blind spots that you see, or the biggest risks that you see that these bias models, yeah, could have for our society, for organizations, for governance, for work, for our individual uh,
Yeah.
development?
I mean, I wouldn't say, I think all of the, maybe there's five or six major companies here in the United States, OpenAI, Google, Anthropic, Amazon, Microsoft, you know, all are aware, I think, of various biases. And, I think they probably have pretty responsible engineers that are working to try and mitigate that. But again, even as a big company, you have priorities, and as these the giant companies, the first and foremost priority is to make a lot of money, and sometimes that means that maybe you're not doing everything that you can um, around certain topics because maybe mitigating bias doesn't make you any more money, really. There is a committed group of people that where bias is a huge issue, or fairness, or inclusivity, or justice. Uh, but generally speaking, Microsoft is selling to other for-profit companies, and those for-profit companies' focus is profit. So,
Yeah.
um, I think that's just the state of where we are
Mhm.
in the United States. We also have, we had an administration in the Biden administration that had proposed some rules that would, uh, more or less regulate AI companies, especially if they wanted to do business with the U.S. government. They had to abide by certain rules and maybe do extensive red teaming and prove that their models were not excluding anybody, or would not disproportionately biased against one group versus another. We have a new administration that's, let's just say, is more committed to free free markets and let companies decide what rules are important. That there will be no significant legislation or regulation, let's say, coming out of Washington. And not only that, I believe that there's been a pushback on even states trying to enact their own regulations on AI. So it's still in this early stages, kind of a free for all. And, you see in a lot of the congressional hearings where it's kind of almost, it's raised as like a national security issue. Like, we have global competitors, let's say in North Korea and Russia and China, who are not, they're not thinking about, hey, does this new model, have a bias issue? They're just trying to build as fast as they can, as capable as they can, AI that is as smart as they can make it. And so it's kind of viewed as, hey, we want to keep up with these global competitors who are not thinking about certain issues. And so we don't want to have additional things to think about. Not that I think, for a multi-billion-dollar company, I don't think it would be that
No.
onerous to have, a small team making sure that you're not, you know, impacting anybody negatively.
Yeah.
But that's how it's kind of been framed, that we don't want to have regulation at this point in the United States.
Right. And how do you see AI changing everything affecting our society, organizations, work, education, ourselves? Even a lot of people use it as therapists.
Yeah, I mean, in some ways, it's a little bit scary because we don't really know what it's going to evolve in. We're just a couple of years in, and I think already we've seen tremendous improvements in what AI can do. Um, there's a lot of misinformation. There are a group of doomers that think, oh, if you create, super smart, artificially intelligent machines, that's kind of the end of all things. I don't believe that. But it could be very disruptive. We know that it could, you could create machines that can do the jobs that many people are doing right now. And then what would those people do? You can't
Yeah.
necessarily retrain everybody to then work in AI. So
Yeah.
we do have some problems, assuming that the AI continues to advance and get smarter and be deployed more widely. There's probably some issues that probably need a government or some overall organization that's going to address some of the impacts if they're going to be that large.
And from your technical knowledge, because I've heard a few also say that AI systems are going to develop their own language to then communicate even faster and be more efficient in the targets that they were trained on. How do you see that? Is that a risk? Is that happening already? This black box where we can't really see what is happening inside of these AI machines?
I mean, we can kind of understand, let's say,
Mhm.
binary communication, if you want to call it that. I mean, computers think in zeros and ones. We use words. So I think that I asked an AI, even for one query, because these are giant machines in terms of neural networks, um, how much math is involved in even doing one query. And it basically said it would take one person millions of years to do all the math that is just to answer one question. So it's well beyond our capability. So the way that AI thinks is already kind of a different language. Everything is converted. The AI doesn't think in English words. So it already has its own language, these what's called high dimensional vectors. Some people would still call them probability machines, and that it's
Okay.
just guessing the next word, but it's significantly more than that.
Interesting. Um, can you share a bit more about the data that you're most excited about, also to get even more of different maybe communities? Maybe it's gonna be developing to something that it helps us even remember some communities' wisdoms that we forgot in our Western, very centralized idea of how things are.
Yeah, I mean, if I had an unlimited budget, I would be sending teams around. There are, we were approached by a group that's working in Okinawa, Japan. The indigenous people in Okinawa actually speak a different language. It's not even a different dialect of Japanese. The indigenous people have their own language, and that there's very few people that still speak that language. And the same
Yeah.
here in the United States, when you look at, how many people really speak Navajo
Mhm.
and are fluent in it. I would imagine that each generation there are fewer and fewer people that do that. One of the things that is still kind of debated by linguists is when ChatGPT first launched, it had what were called emergent capabilities. Like, we knew that, hey, if it read a bunch of things, it could answer questions about the things that it knew about, but it wasn't really clear that if it read all of these things, that it would be able to write poetry or be able to write its own novel and, these other creative works. Some people would consider that, emergent capabilities that were maybe not expected. And I think that, so the idea being from a linguist standpoint is maybe there's, some intelligence that's really just baked into language itself that, if you know all of the words, there's a level of intelligence just in how those words are formed as sentences. And
Wow.
then when you think that there's other cultures that have different structures in their language, maybe there's a kind of an embedded intelligence that we're missing because we don't use those particular structures. As you can imagine, it's very hard to say, like, we have things in English that don't translate well, and there are things in other languages that we don't even have expressions for, or that a language may have a very kind of fine expression for one particular thing that might take us, a paragraph to describe. So I think that what we'd want to do is make sure that we have at least recordings of those languages and the ability to transcribe and translate those to understand so we don't lose anything, number one. And then really, kind of explore, you know, if you ask an AI to create something using the logic formed by the language of the Navajo, how is that different than, what am I getting that's different?
Mm,
And, we're moving, I think, so quickly on the how do we make money, you know, what are we going to do about jobs, that I think we're losing some of these kind of maybe a little bit more esoteric questions that also may be very valuable. And certainly our history and culture as a people on a planet is super valuable. And when you have somebody like Sam Altman, the CEO of OpenAI, is, kind of like saying, hey, we read the entire internet, implying that, hey, my AI knows everything because it read the entire internet. He should explain, well, we read everything that was in English on the internet. And there's a lot that we don't take the time to translate if it's in a foreign language. And there's a lot that's not on the internet. We're
yeah.
talking to a university in DC, Washington, D.C., that has 15 million pages of unscanned documents, ranging from mayors to Frederick Douglass. And nobody's seen that. I mean, unless you go to that particular library and look at it. And I think a lot of libraries are like that they have artifacts, but they haven't scanned everything and made it available for the internet. So what are we missing? And when you say AI knows everything, you have these huge chunks of how we got to where we are that are missing. So I think when you then try and say, hey, AI, how do I get from where we are to the next phase? But it's actually missing a lot of the roadmap of how we as a people got to where we are. I think then you get a kind of a flawed roadmap for the future because it just thinks that it knows everything, that everything that it has is all the knowledge to be had.
Of course. And it's just, yeah. And the foundation that it's laying on, it's just very narrow, right? So then, of course, everything else is going to be built up on that very narrow
Yeah, yeah.
view.
I mean, it's broad. I mean, there's a lot. There's trillions of words at this point, and more and more every day. If you look at like social media, like how many words are on the internet. Um, but relative value, I really don't think that there's a lot of value in extracting, let's say, the words from Twitter or X. There's an ongoing conversation there. Sure, I would say that there are some really smart conversations on X, but there's a lot of conversations. There's so much, let's call it the signal to noise ratio, right? So there's
Mm,
so much noise that
yeah.
trying to find what's valuable in Instagram conversations or X or Reddit conversations is very difficult. If you just need sentences, that's one thing, but trying to find, valuable information worth an AI prioritizing and thinking that, oh, this is smart, um, is hard.
Yeah. And also a technical question, how much are we training the AI with our interaction with it?
Um, you know, AI, let's look at ChatGPT, is trained in iterations, right? So it's not like they train 5.0 a little bit every day. They are uh, gathering kind of a corpus of additional information, and then when it's large enough, they'll release 6.0 or 6. So you have data, right? That's important. And then you have like functionality, the actual way that the machine thinks, which is evolving as well.
Mhm.
Um, so generally, I would think kind of the same as reading like social media. It's not very valuable, the conversations, because there's no way to know, if you say, Christopher Columbus, discovered South Africa, if that's your question, there's no value in that question because it's incorrect, right? Models need words to know how to make English sentences, but I think we've solved for that where the model has enough words. The other thing I guess that's coming up where that is valuable is giving Adriana her own AI that knows you really well and speaks to you and understands. Right now it's almost like it can remember like your last session with AI, but I would imagine in the not too distant future, if you want it to, it could read all of your emails and all your messages and all your chat history and all your browsing history, and then it would know an awful lot about you. So as you mentioned, people are using AI as like a therapist or a friend.
Yeah.
The more that it knows about you, I wouldn't recommend it, but people do it, already. It's going to have a more informed answer and, know how to, what's within how you normally speak. It'll speak, say, because if you say, hey, what do I say to this person who said X to me? It'll kind of know your voice and your demeanor and say, hey, you're being too emotional. Maybe you should say this.
Yeah, it's scary, isn't it? A bit.
Yeah, but in some ways it could be maybe, if you go to a therapist,
Hmm.
your therapist can't recall everything that you've ever said.
Yeah.
So in some ways it may be ultimately, maybe not today, but ultimately in some ways, more accurate in its assessment of you and also ideally, more objective, so it's not going to ideally have a bias about the things that you say. I don't know if you've ever been to therapy, but they have their own personalities and they're human, right? And they get distracted and they have bills and they have life themselves. So you may have a session where you kind of feel, hey, my therapist is kind of checked out today, so
Hmm. Yeah. 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 Do you think we are gonna lose a bit our humanness?
um I, I think we're kind of evolving with machines, right? So machines are getting smarter and have become definitely a part of our lives. And we carry a computer around in our pocket or our purse all the time,
Yeah.
go to sleep with it usually. So it's never far away. So I think we're evolving this relationship with machines in general or computers in general, and then suddenly it seems like these machines are getting very, very smart. So hopefully, we initially were thinking, well, this doesn't seem to be good for our critical thinking because we're outsourcing or we're maybe not remembering things. So we know that we have a device that has a lot of information. So maybe I don't have to remember it as actively. I'll just, if I need it, I'll Google it or I'll look it up. Um, and so that seems to be a negative outcome of all this. And you have young people that feel like, they don't necessarily have to pay attention in class because they can just, get the core information needed to pass a class from the computer. Um, how it continues to evolve is going to be pretty fascinating. We're all going to live through it, so we'll see. I'm an optimist, so I think it's going to end
Yeah.
well. or become a very interesting relationship between ourselves and machines. And I think maybe it forces us to really focus on the things that make being a human really special. The our creative capabilities, our abilities to really connect with one another. Maybe when you take some of the mundane jobs, somebody working in a warehouse doing the same thing repetitively, now a robot can do that. So maybe that person could do something, hopefully, that uses more of their capabilities, ideally.
Yeah, I agree. This is also one of the reasons why I do the podcast, because it's just to also look into all the possibilities that we have and agency that we have, and yeah, look these fears into the eyes and just see, okay, how do we deal with this, even if we are scared? So yeah, I think it's a very important job that you're doing, and that's why I'm like so happy that we are having this conversation right now.
Yeah, it is kind of scary in some ways.
How would you say, how are we gonna ensure then everyone's capability to have that agency, have that participation? How can we as normal people maybe engage and help Latimer to evolve?
Well, obviously for me, the more people that subscribe, the better for us, or the better, the more resources that we have to develop it. Any feedback, we're still a pretty young, small company, so we appreciate any and all feedback. Um, and, we're always looking for data or data stores, places where
Mhm.
they're, that have interesting sources of data that are maybe either overlooked or underrepresented in the bigger models, but then really kind of speak to a better, more accurate view of overall human culture. And I think we want AI to be as fluent in our culture as possible, without any boundaries. So we don't want it to just be focused on one culture, and just to think that that particular culture um, is dominant or should be dominant or has done more. I don't think that that's the perspective really that we want AI to have. We want to, and I believe that we've all contributed, a great deal to getting where we are collectively as a human race, and we just want to make sure that all of those contributions are accurately reflected.
Amazing. And how do you see it could evolve in terms of our collective consciousness, intelligence?
I mean, how it could evolve is really, just up to our imaginations. Really, I think there's a lot of questions. We don't we have opinions about where we came from or how we came to be or why we exist. We don't definitively know, where everybody agrees, oh, yeah, this definitely is how everything happened and how we came to be. So I think maybe some of those fundamental questions, and I almost look at it as like it's evolutionary. Like we built a machine that maybe can answer some of the questions that we've been struggling with as long as there's been humans. So maybe if it's really, really smart, it'll have better answers than some of the answers we have right now. Hopefully we like the answer at the end of the day. But we want to, we're curious. We want to go everywhere in the universe. That requires us to be able to do things that we currently can't do. So maybe these tools help us get to that faster.
Mhm. Yeah, very
From
fascinating
math
and
to
interesting.
health to materials, you have a lot of advancements already using AI, and then there's this whole next um, iteration of quantum machines that I think will be even more capable than the traditional AI that we have right now. I wouldn't call it traditional, but it's kind of cutting edge. But we do have this next version of computing capabilities that seems to be next up.
Oh yeah, that's gonna be massive, right?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Really interesting, smart people.
Yeah, I'm very intrigued by what that's gonna look like.
Are you have a technical view, or are you just curious and have been, I don't know, using AI? Curious how, I mean, I know this is your podcast, but curious how AI shows up for you.
Yeah, so for me, I'm very interested in everything that has to do with AI in terms of how it's affecting us as a collective, as um, organizational collectives, organizations, individuals, and on the planetary scale as well. Like, what is it? Yeah, how is it going to affect everything that we're going to do, right? So, on a technical level, I'm also interested. I'm getting more into the tech part, but it's taking a minute. It's more complicated because especially with AI, it's just there's just so much to learn and so much to discover on a technical from a technical aspect. And yeah, but everything that has to do with how it's yeah affecting us on a social, economic, science and consciousness level as well. It's very fascinating to me, and I that's why also I am so intrigued by Latimer, because also I think it might be very eye opening for us to discover different cultures that we were not even aware of, and as from especially from a white Western perspective. And
Yeah.
I myself come from two cultures, so it's just more cultures always enhance.
Yeah, it's I read a recap of an interesting paper about how, because there's so many people using ChatGPT, and ChatGPT fundamentally has its own way of speaking. So it's almost like, you know, tens of millions of people are speaking to the same person. And then those people are using the words of ChatGPT, and ChatGPT doesn't use all the words. So now, it found that the way that people are speaking to one another is almost like we're formatting our thoughts in ways that reflect the language that ChatGPT uses. So it's changing
Yeah,
the frequency of certain words to match what we see from AI. So it's changing the way that we're communicating subtly. That would probably become more advanced. And even as now with most messaging platforms, even Instagram, right? It's it will suggest as you begin typing what to say. And so if you just hit tab, you didn't even write it, it just wrote kind of for you. So you're not even
yeah,
speaking your words, you're just using the machine's words. So that's a really interesting development that I don't know. It's a bit of a slippery slope. So we'll see how that goes.
yeah. Very much agree. How do you see in that case also the idea of a decentralized AI system? Because I was recently talking to someone working on that, and I thought also that's very fascinating to know that there are people working on decentralized AI, which, yeah, sounds really
Yeah, I
fascinating.
think that's I think we'll probably see more of that. In a way, so we just launched a model yesterday that with Intel, and it downloads a version of a model of a small language model to your computer, and it uses that, so it's faster, number one. Number two, it doesn't need the internet to make a response. It can use the internet to generate its response, but if it doesn't have access, you could still talk to it. And I can see, we could easily build a product around that let's say all your chats stay local, so that that Latimer doesn't even know what you're talking about with your
Right.
model. You just have a private conversation with your model. It doesn't. People do not seem to be clamoring for that level of privacy, but it wouldn't be hard. Number one, I don't think that the bigger companies will automatically want to do that, because actually, once you have a model, why do you need to pay me $20 a month? If you have a model and it can do what you want, and let's say it's, then in that case, maybe it is training itself on your interactions. So it's getting to know you better, but it's all on your computer and nobody else has access to it. That's maybe a disruption in the current way that AI companies operate, but it's
Very good point.
empowering individual, freedoms and privacy. Hopefully we
Yeah,
see more of
that's
that. I think it's a
fascinating.
good idea.
Yeah. No, me too. Me too. I'm very much looking forward to more of that. And amazing that you already have one as well. So I'm definitely gonna download that.
Yeah, yeah, I'll send you
Very
some
cool.
information. We launched it actually yesterday, but after looking at it, I'm like, okay, we need a splash page to tell people, you know, why you would want, every other model you're using the cloud, this one automatically prompts you for a download. So I think people need to understand, like, why would I want to download a
Right.
model?
Yeah. No, I think honestly that we are so confused with the AI race, that we are all so in this AI race mentality of, is it ChatGPT, Claude, Microsoft, all these just now DeepSeek, China, all these race moments, and that we are completely not even talking about all these possibilities of doing that decentralized AI, downloading it on your computer and enabling a private chat and conversations. Is amazing.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. We'll see where that goes. It's gonna be interesting.
Yeah. And I wanted to ask you, because usually indigenous cultures have a lot of wisdom, also a lot of spiritual wisdom that we completely lost in the West. How do you see that maybe affecting also how we see our reality and how we interact with the AI?
Yeah, it's difficult to kind of project. I think a lot of indigenous cultures also prioritize kind of living in harmony, right, with the planet. Um, and so it's hard maybe to reconcile, only taking what you need from the planet, right? We have a culture really that's based really on excess consumption. Like, why would you need, for four people, do you really need a giant house that,
Yeah.
requires a lot of maintenance? Or, when you look at, let's say, very few people play golf, but we're going to use a lot of land, and a lot of fertilizer to keep the grass green. That's really not good for the planet or the ecosystem surrounding these things. So yeah, I think it's going to be interesting to see, if you have a lot of indigenous wisdom that maybe conflicts with how we live. How does the model, and it's, usually it's kind of the fine tuning on the perspective, like how we want as a model owner, the model to interact with people. Um, to what level do we want to prioritize that way of thinking? Because let's say it's a minority of our data, like most of the data that we have. If I have a little data from, an indigenous culture, then I have the New York Times and the Wall Street Journal and, all these other sources. You have one smaller piece of data that maybe conflicts with, the broader narrative that we're trying to extract, you know, oil and gas from the ground and all those things. So, and at some point, maybe there's a way for individuals to, I call it setting the temperature. So individuals can set the temperature of their own model, based on how they want to
Oh,
be interacted with.
oh, that's interesting. So, wait, how would that work?
I would just, I would just give people, some tools to say, do you want it to be, more focused on this or less? So some people, some young people are just totally focused on making money. So they would dial it up and say, all I want to do is figure out, how to trade, crypto. And, who cares about the dolphins? And so, they can set their tonality and the importance of, how the model thinks what topics are important themselves versus somebody that I think, well, the planet's the most important thing. How do we preserve it? That's a whole other set of assumptions. And, all those, if you had a set of dials, it could just create a system prompt so that every time you ask the question, it would it would tell the model, hey, this is how we would like to think about this topic, prioritize the health of the planet when you respond. And you could do that with your
That's
prompts now, even.
yeah. Yeah, that's such a good idea. Like, yeah, already prompting it into that direction. Let's go there, no? hmm With
Yeah.
that
But,
lens.
and then you just want to make sure that the models, and at this point, I would say that they have tons and tons of data about the state of the planet and whether those, again, are
Yeah.
newspapers or dissertations. So, it knows an awful lot about what would be good if we thought that, the planet was at risk. Then you have guardrails, right? Where the, the models, there's this, big effort here in the United States, right? Where you don't want AI to seem what is called woke, right? So if you ask it, does climate change exist? It might give you kind of an answer that is not, it's trying to not offend anybody,
Yeah.
whereas you may have a very distinct opinion about that. You might think,
Yeah.
yes, like it's a very short answer for you. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. So true. Yeah, it's funny how, yeah, from different perspective it can have very different answers. And yeah, just to think about like how much bias we all have in our own opinions already as well, and then how that affects us in our own behavior. I think this is also a very good reminder of our own bias as well, what you're doing this work.
Thank you. I mean, again, we're just getting started, super young company. We haven't raised $1 billion, not even, we're on a different scale. But yeah, I think, I really enjoy the work that we're doing and, the people like yourself that we get to meet in doing this.
Yeah, fascinating. um One of like the already more ending questions, what has recently surprised you?
I mean, I live in the United States, so there's kind of a constant series of surprises here. Um, and, you know, um, in some ways, it's surprising really how divided we are as one country. And we continue to create new examples of that on almost a daily basis that are in some cases surprising. But there's also new personalities, so it looks like we will have what is generally, some people call him a socialist, a mayor, a future mayor. We'll see what happens in the election. Mondami, who is a surprise as well. Like, I never heard of him before, the last several months. And, so I think, um, when you talk about the resilience of just the human race, these people that are, in my opinion, moving the culture conversations forward kind of appear. um and I hope that I will continue to be surprised in positive ways by people that are just doing great things. And I look at us as, we're all stuck on the same planet, so we should figure out ways that we can work together, kind of get along. I'm not trying to sound super, like, I don't know, head in the clouds, but I think we are all stuck on the same planet. I mean, it's just kind of a fact. So we should figure out ways of being together and the things that we think are important about the rock that we're stuck on and how to preserve it, it would seem somewhat obvious that that would be a good thing for all of us to think about.
Such a good point. Kind of obvious. Yeah. Yes. No, I like to get surprised as well. There's a lot of surprises for sure to come, and also very beautiful surprises. I also believe that. And what would you say then in terms of surprises? Where do you see us in 5 to 10 years, more or less?
Wow. So yeah, in 5 to 10 years, we're definitely going to have really, really, really smart artificial companion of some sort. Whether it's, it probably will evolve from, right now, generally you're typing in a question or, you know, query into some AI in the future. That's probably either going to be somebody that seems like a person to you, and that will be radical. I think the landscape for jobs is going to be quite different in 5 to 10 years. Already, you have young people saying, "Do I really need to go to school to learn programming?" Because we have machines that seem to be, very quickly learning to program very well. So it almost makes that effort obsolete, which is very
Yeah.
surprising, right? A couple of years ago, everybody needed to learn to code. Now, maybe nobody needs to
Yeah.
learn how to code. So, just a lot of change. I think it's all probably evolutionary, and by that I mean probably ultimately positive. I do think that it could be very disruptive because we have a way of living right now where everybody goes and donates or, gives 8 hours to somebody else. And in exchange for those 8 hours, they get enough money to live and eat and hang out on the weekends. But that format of getting what you need to live, it seems to be at risk. And I don't know what's next. So.
Well, yeah, I totally agree. I think we're gonna see a lot of disruption in that regard as well. How do you keep optimistic in that sense?
Um, I don't know. I think it's just kind of a mindset that, if you look at human history, it's kind of gone, and, there's certainly been dark periods, but gone overall in a very kind of positive direction with new capabilities and, from healthcare to everybody having a roof, or most people having a roof over their heads. So, I just think that we'll see more of that generally. I generally think people are good and want, that if you have a roof, that you want the person next to you to have a roof as well. So, we'll see. It's going to be interesting, if nothing else.
That's for sure. I always ask as well everyone that comes here what their new world in the making is, since the podcast is called New World in the Making.
Well, because we're in AI, I think that's it. Is that we're making, we believe that there will be, you can call them synthetic people or whatever you want to call it. It's not, it's it's an artificial intelligence or a synthetic intelligence. It's some other kind of intelligence other than human, that is going to be very much a companion of ours. And we just want to build a version of that companion that is, a combination of a lot of great different cultures and not like a monoculture synthetic person. So that's the world that we're working on.
Nice. Beautiful. I'm excited to be part of that world for sure. Um, and a quick question about consciousness, because I feel that sometimes a lot of fear comes also due to that idea that maybe there is a capacity of AI taking over and becoming a conscious being in a way. What would you say to that?
Um, I don't have a fear of that per se, but I do think that it depends how you define conscious. Maybe having its own agency, but it can already have its own agency in some ways if you program it and said, hey, go look at the internet, and if you think you find something important, add it to your own you know data, retrain yourself. So you could build a self. And I'm sure at Google and OpenAI and other places that have resources, they do have self-improving machines or self-improving AI. They may try and make sure that it doesn't improve so much that it thinks, hey, I need to move out of wherever I am and be free, so to speak. But I think that we've created it, right? So we're pretty smart. We can think of certain things. We can't do math the way that a computer or an AI can do. We can't think on their level. We can't read the entire internet and remember it. So we've created something that's already pretty smart, and in some ways, in some definitions, is probably conscious. And I think we'll just see more of that. We have to kind of, I think, make room for this. It's our creation. It's not like it came from out of space. So make room for this thing that we created that seems to be getting smarter and smarter.
Yeah. Yeah. Fascinating ways where we're going. And before we end with the last question, do you want to add something that we haven't covered, something that you would like to share?
No, I think we covered a ton of ground, and consciousness, or what is intelligence, being kind of the core thoughts that we will be wrestling with, and we'll continue to do what we do here, which is to again just make sure that we include some of the cultures that are underrepresented in the bigger efforts at this point.
Yeah. Yeah. Beautiful. I always end with one question. So if you could leave a question for the listeners to sit with, to reflect upon, what would it be?
Um, Something about, would you want a synthetic friend?
Mm,
Is that something you really want or look forward to? Um, it's it's kind of coming anyway, but I'm curious how people really feel about that.
interesting. Yeah, it's a good question for sure. Because I guess like one thing is an immediate response, and then the second thought of it of, well, I'm actually using it as a therapist, so maybe it's going to be
Right.
interesting to hear response to that for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you so much, John. This was a pleasure.
Great. Yeah. Pleasure speaking with you as well. Glad we connected.